Greetings, everyone, and welcome to God Save the King. I am your host, Tim Keyes. I want to thank you for joining me on the Truth Be Told Radio Network, where you can hear my show every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, if you're listening to this show in its original broadcast, then it is Friday, December 22nd, 2023, which means we are right smack dab in the middle of the quote-unquote Christmas season. Christmas is only a couple of days away when you're listening to this original broadcast. So, there really is no better time of the year than to discuss what I want to talk about today, which is this whole notion of December 25th. Now, if you've listened to my show before, you've heard me say that I don't believe for 1 second that Jesus was born on December 25th. I absolutely believe that Jesus was born on September 11th of 3 BC. He was born in the fall. And the reason I believe that is because that is where, in my opinion, the biblical evidence actually points to a fall birth date, and specifically a September birth date. So the question, of course, is, well, how do you get to that conclusion? Because the standard argument, of course, is, well, wait a second, everybody knows Jesus was born on December 25th, don't they? Right? I mean, I run into this all the time. Now, to be very straightforward here, the vast majority of the time when this comes up as a topic of conversation, most people respond by going, oh, yeah, I don't really believe he was born on December 25th. That really doesn't surprise me at all. That is the most common response I get, far and away. It dwarfs all other responses that people simply go, oh yeah, no, of course not. Of course he wasn't born on December 25th. Yeah, I don't really believe that. But there are still an awful lot of people who are shocked. They say, oh, what do you mean he wasn't born on December 25th? Are you kidding? I'm thinking of a specific person as an example right now who's like, no, of course he was born on December 25th. How could that possibly be wrong? How could we possibly have not had that right? I mean, we've been celebrating his birthday on December 25th for 2,000 years, haven't we? And then the reality is that the answer to that question is actually, no, it's not as cut and dry a topic of conversation. It's not as cut and dry a question as a lot of people think it is. And even within and we could take this in many different directions, many different directions. We could look at the modern history of Christmas. For example, many of you have probably heard me say that I call Christmas an invented tradition. In other words, it's a tradition that was deliberately manufactured to appear as if it has been a long-standing domestic tradition, when in reality that is not true. The holiday that we recognize as quote-unquote Christmas is really only about 200, maybe 250 years old maximum. I mean, really, it's more like 150 years old. I love pointing out to people that during the English Civil War in England, during the English Civil War, the celebration of Christmas was made illegal. During the colonial era in the United States, in several of the colonies, Christmas was illegal. And that's because the Puritans who moved here from England, who wanted a quote unquote more pure faith, they recognized that Christmas simply is not in the Bible. It's not. The birth of Jesus is in the Bible, but Christmas is not in the Bible. It's just not there. Anything even resembling this celebration of his birth. We are never commanded or frankly even encouraged to worship Jesus on his birthday, so to speak, as an act of, religious obligation or anything like that. It just simply isn't there. It just simply is not there. So that's one angle that you could approach this from. Another angle that I could approach this from that we're not going to do, but I'll mention it briefly, is this whole issue of, did early Christians seek to co-opt December 25th from the quote unquote pagans? Because anybody who's done any research into this, you can't miss the fact that there is a glaring quote unquote coincidence that this coincides with the winter solstice, right? Now, maybe not on the exact date, but winter solstice festivals were common throughout the pagan world. So therefore, this is a common accusation, is that the early church deliberately chose a late December birth date for the birth of Jesus so that they could co-opt these pagan holidays. Now, there is some truth to this, but there's also a lot of inaccuracy in this statement as well. It's not, once again, it's not the cut and dry black and white question that everybody thinks it is. There is significant record that the Christian church absolutely endeavored to draw pagans away from their midwinter festivals, their winter solstice festivals, by celebrating Christmas. But that actually only really began to happen in earnest in the 3rd and 4th centuries, frankly, coinciding with the establishment of Christmas as a holiday, right? But it wasn't one and then the other. It was very much a mixed bag because Christmas was not established at that point, okay? The December 25th birth date was not a thing for a first 200 years after Jesus walked the earth. And there's no record of Christians celebrating his birthday on December 25th until at least the early 3rd century. Okay, the early 3rd century. That's when you start to see it, and that's only when you start to see it. It didn't really become established until the 4th and 5th centuries. That's when it actually began to have some teeth. See, and of course, then that's when the practice of, oh, well, let's get the pagans away from their winter solstice festivals and let's get them worshiping Jesus on Christmas, because after all, they're so similar anyway, and they incorporated a lot of the same practices. That's where you get all these stories about how early Christians utilized the same practices as the pagans with Yule logs and Christmas trees and decorations and stuff like that. So that's another way we could approach this. And frankly, that's really not what I'm going to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is, let's look at the biblical record. Let's look at the biblical evidence and try to show where the biblical evidence leads us. Because, see, that's the critical point. If the biblical evidence doesn't point you in a certain direction, then why are you going that direction? Why do we even look in a certain direction if the biblical evidence doesn't suggest it? Okay, that's a really, really good question, because back to our fundamental premise. Well, everybody knows he was born on December 25th, right? No, not right. Not everybody knows that. That has not been consistent, certainly not for 2,000 years, not even close. And as I said, in England, in colonial America, Christmas was illegal because there were Puritans and other Protestants who were like, we're not doing that here. We're not celebrating the birth of Jesus on December 25th if the Bible doesn't say so. We're not doing that. Right? Very, very, very common. And Christmas did not become a national holiday in the United States until the middle of the 19th century. Okay? Did you hear me say that? Christmas did not become a national holiday. And it was, frankly, it was, what's the word I'm searching for? It was, passed into law state by state, because this is the United States of America, right? Every state has its own state laws, so they couldn't just make a national mandate. It had to go state by state by state. right? So that began in the middle of the 19th century. And then the final state to pass it into law, I think, was Alabama, if I'm not mistaken, in like 1936. Okay, don't quote me on that. The dates may not be exactly correct, but it's something like unto that the final states that actually passed Christmas into being a national holiday was a southern state like Mississippi or Alabama. Pretty sure it was Alabama, and it was in the 1930s. Very, very interesting. But so once again, Jesus was born on December 25th, right? Everybody knows that, right? No, we don't know that. This debate has been going on for a long time. I love to mention the fact that Ezra Stiles, who was the seventh president of Yale, okay, Yale College, the seventh president, he wrote in his personal diary on December 25th, right? He wrote this entry on December 25th. Had it been the will of Christ that we should know his birth date, he would have told us when it was. My paraphrase, but you get the idea. He wrote it in his diary. Hey, if we're supposed to celebrate his birthday, he at least would have let us know when that was. But since he didn't let us know when that was, frankly, probably anticipating what a nightmare it would become, okay, then we don't absolutely know. I mean, despite my confidence in believing that it was September 11th of 3 BC based upon biblical and astronomical evidence, do I absolutely know that? No, I don't. Is it proven beyond a shadow of a doubt? No, it's not. It's not proven, and it probably can't be proven, quote unquote, in the scientific sense. All we can do is stack up the evidence and say, hey, this is the best evidence we have. This piece of evidence, this piece of evidence, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, they all point us in this direction. Therefore, this is the best conclusion we can draw. But does that mean it's proven? No, unfortunately, it does not. So let's talk about this evidence. So when it comes to evidence and not tradition, see, because tradition is not evidence. Tradition is not evidence, and you can't do that. You just can't do that. If we were in a court of law, if we were trying to present our case in a court of law, and you go, well, we've been doing it this way, the judge would go, no, no dice. You can't tell me, well, we've been doing it this way for 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 years. I need to know the evidence that tells me it's thus and so, not the tradition. Wouldn't count, right? So this is very broad strokes. This is very anecdotal to get started here. But then as we get deeper into this, we'll talk more strenuously about the evidence. So first thing I want to say is, what is the likelihood that Jesus was born in the summer? That is pretty much zero. There is basically no evidence of any kind that points to a summer birth date for Jesus of Nazareth. So you can pretty much take that one and just put it on the shelf. Don't worry about it. Now, flip it over. Now, what about evidence that he was born in the winter? Because this, of course, is what everybody thinks. Was he born in the winter? Is there any evidence that suggests that Jesus was born in the winter? And I'm going to surprise some people here and say this one gets an outside maybe. A maybe, but it's an outside maybe. So summer, no, there's just no evidence for summer. Winter, maybe, but it's a pretty darn outside maybe. Okay. Now, what about spring? Okay. Spring also gets a maybe, but this one is a better maybe. Not by a lot, but it is. It's a better maybe than winter, and absolutely than summer. So summer, pretty much no chance. Winter, maybe, but pretty far-fetched. Spring, a better maybe. Your best one is fall. And I'm going to tell you why as we get into this evidence, right? Now, why are we talking about this? This is because, believe it or not, when we read what are called the infancy narratives. Now, the infancy narratives are Matthew chapters 1 and 2 and Luke chapters 1 and 2. These are what are known as the infancy narratives. Mark does not have an infancy narrative. John does not have an infancy narrative. So if you ever hear the phrase infancy narratives, it only means the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, chapters 1 and 2. Okay. And some people consider a little bit of Luke 3 an infancy narrative, but that's splitting hairs, not absolutely a critical point. But here's what is very interesting about these two combined records. We have more major chronological indicators in these two records, especially Luke. We have more major chronological indicators in these two records than pretty much any other record in the Bible. Now, I say pretty much because there's some other records in the Bible that have heavy chronology in them, but these, it's really pretty stunning. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we can figure this out, right? Now, once again, I would never make this a point of faith, right? That you don't have, well, actually, I take that back. I would make it a point of faith under the right circumstances. And what those right circumstances are is the fact that God does not traffic in falsehood, okay? God is never going to validate falsehood. That's not going to happen. Okay. God only traffics in truth. So if you're in a situation where the truth is on the line, yeah, then you have to be careful. You have to be very, very, very careful because God does not traffic in falsehood. He's not going to validate your lies, even if you think, well, he looks upon the heart and I just really love Jesus and that's why I worship him on December 25th. That's a very fuzzy position to be in, right? Now, I'm not trying not to be condemnatory. That's not my point, but that's just being a very, very fuzzy position because God traffics in truth. Now, but let's go to our list. What are these major chronological indicators? Now, some of them are very big. Other ones are smaller. Some of them are primary. Others are secondary. In other words, some of them rely upon the more fundamental one, right? So like the first big one out of the gate is that we are told that it's during the reign of Augustus Caesar. Well, this is both is and isn't helpful. It isn't helpful in the sense that Augustus Caesar reigned for, what was it, 40 years, 41 years, right? From 27 BC to 14 AD is when Augustus Caesar reigned. So that's a pretty darn big chunk of time to say, oh, well, we know when Jesus was born. He was born sometime within a 40-year period. Okay, that doesn't really help us very much. But what it does help us with is the fact that Augustus Caesar is probably the major historical character of his age. Okay, and I'll come back to that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to blow through the list of the major chronological indicators, and then we're going to come back and talk about each one briefly, and then we're going to come back again and talk about each one in depth. So let me just bounce through these real quick. So number one, you've got he was born during the reign of Augustus Caesar. That's number one. Already mentioned that. Then you've got number two. He was born during the reign of Herod the Great. So chronological number one, Augustus Caesar. Number two, Herod the Great. Number three, he was born in connection to a registration that was administered by a Roman official named Publius Sulpicius Quirinius. This is the infamous census or taxation or registration. So he was born in close relation to this registration. Come back to that. So one, Augustus Caesar. Two, Herod the Great. Three, Quirinius, right? Number four, he was born in a mathematical relationship to the offering of incense in the temple by the priest Zechariah, who ministered in the temple according to the division of Abijah. The priests ministered in the temple according to divisions. Zechariah was of the division of Abijah. If we know when the division of Abijah ministered in the temple, then we can add 9 months to that for the birth of John the Baptist, and then add 6 months to that for the birth of Jesus Christ. You're going to be in the ballpark. So that's actually Very significant. Okay, that one has teeth. Okay, now the next one is the shepherds in the field. Okay, now this one is very interesting because this one is almost an eliminator. This is the one that actually says no, it couldn't have been in winter because shepherds only watched their flocks in open field between roughly March and October. Okay, there were abiding in the fields at night shepherds near Bethlehem, right? That means March to October. Between October and March, they brought them in from the fields and kept them in sheepfolds. That was the common practice. So if you want to demonstrate that the shepherds were somehow in open field in December, then frankly, you've got to demonstrate that this is an exception, not the rule. So that kind of changes things. But then the big one, of course, is that when the wise men, the magi, arrive at the court of Herod the Great, they say, "We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." And then based upon the dialogue between the wise men and Herod, we are frankly required to understand that Jesus had to have been born in close relationship to the quote unquote appearance of this star. But then, of course, the big question becomes, well, what was this star? And of course, theories about this they're just all over the place. Some of them are very good. A lot of them are just absolute junk. And there has been all kinds of erroneous and extraneous traditions that try to tell us what this star was and was not. And therefore, his birth date can land anywhere if you've got a very, highly subjective interpretation of what this star was. So burn through the list one more time here real quick. You got the life of Augustus Caesar, or the reign of Augustus Caesar, rather, the reign of Herod the Great, the registration of Quirinius, the administration of the incense offering by Zechariah in the temple, shepherds being in the field, and then the arrival of the Magi and the citation of, quote unquote, his star. We have seen his star in the east, in the rising, and have come to worship him. So this is 6 major chronological indicators. That's pretty heavy. And then, like I said, there's some secondary indicators that depend upon these things that actually help us put the puzzle together to determine when Jesus was, or frankly was not, born. So real quick now. So now let's go through the list again, and I will get a little more in depth on this pass through of these indicators, and then we'll go through the list one last time, and I'll get a little more in depth still to help us focus in on why was or was it not December 25th. So once again, the reign of Augustus Caesar. On one hand, this doesn't help us much because it's a huge period of time, too big to actually help us pinpoint when Jesus was born. But, okay, why is this helpful? The reason this is helpful is because Augustus Caesar was the preeminent historical figure of that age. And you get a lot of atheists and skeptics who want to try to make a claim that Jesus wasn't real, that he is made up. He's not really a historical figure. He's symbolic, he's figurative, he's poetic, he's something that people just invented, right? Well, the problem is we have too many historical records that verify the existence of Jesus, that if you do a side by, and of course now most of these are from the Bible, which skeptics and atheists want to dismiss the Bible. Sorry, you're not allowed to do that. If our buzz phrase for the past 3 years has been follow the science, right? Well, most people who say follow the science don't actually follow the science. They follow what they want to believe, and then they use that as a buzz phrase to try to end the conversation because they think that their evidence proves their point when they haven't actually really looked at the science, right? The bottom line is we have thousands and thousands and thousands of historical documents that cite the existence of Jesus of Nazareth. Sorry, they cite his existence. Okay, right? Thousands, right? If you're going to try to make the claim that Jesus didn't exist, you've also got to make the claim that Augustus Caesar didn't exist. See, and in my opinion, that's why this is here, is you've got a straight up side-by-side comparison. You've got Augustus Caesar versus Jesus of Nazareth. If Jesus didn't exist, then neither did Caesar, because you don't have the historical evidence to support your claim if you follow the evidence. Okay, if there's no evidence that Jesus was here, then there's no evidence that Augustus was here. Okay, now, what about Herod the Great? Because Herod the Great also reigned for a very long time. So if we're citing the reign of Herod the Great as our evidence that Jesus was born during a certain time frame, and say, okay, wait a second, time out. That's 35 years. That's 35 years worth of time. That's a little too vague. It doesn't really helpful. It doesn't really help us. It's not very helpful until we realize this. Herod had to be alive when the Magi arrived. Okay, Herod had to be alive when the Magi arrived, and Herod died in close relation to the birth of Jesus. Because if you remember, the end of the story, the quote unquote, the end of the story of the Nativity, is the fact that the Magi arrive, they visit the young child, Jesus, in Bethlehem. Joseph is warned in a dream that Herod is going to try to kill the young child. So Joseph leaves Bethlehem and takes his small family to Egypt to avoid Herod's wrath. Then when Herod is dead, he is told again in a dream that it is safe to return to Judea. Now, we do not know exactly how long Joseph, Mary, and Jesus remained in Egypt after Herod was dead. Okay, now this is very interesting. This is very important. When they do return, see, because he's told in a dream that Herod is dead, and they decide to return to Judea, and apparently Joseph is intent upon returning to Bethlehem. Because when they get back to Judea is when scripture says that when they learned that Herod Archelaus ruled in his father's place, they turned aside and went to Nazareth, thereby fulfilling the prophecy that said he would be called a Nazarene, right? But very interesting that they appear to have been returning to Bethlehem, but when they learned that Archelaus was ruling in his father's place, then they went to Galilee. Now, this is important because this also means that Archelaus still had to be in power. If Archelaus was no longer in power, then this doesn't make sense. See, so that's why there is such an amazing concentration of chronological markers in these two records, is because now you can take these pieces and you can shuffle them around and piece them together and go, oh, but wait, this one's got to go here. If this, then this, and that, then this, and then this, then that, and then put the pieces together and you start to get a picture, right? Because I've seen representations of the Gospels where they talk about Jesus being, quote unquote, raised in Egypt, right? Okay, well, Herod Archelaus was deposed by Augustus Caesar in 6 AD. 6 AD. He didn't last very long, right? He didn't come into power until 1 BC. So you're looking at a maximum of about 7 years. That's the only possible time frame. So Jesus did not live in Egypt until he was, 8, 9, 10 years old. It didn't go that long. The longest it could have been was 6 or 7 years old. And the language says when Joseph learned that Herod was dead, well, that kind of suggests Herod hadn't been dead very long. However long it took the news to get to Egypt, which really wouldn't have been very long. That could have been as little as just a few weeks. That's it. That's really all it would have taken for the word to spread, was a few weeks. So they may have been in Egypt really only a matter of several months. It could have been under a year. All right. So we don't really know for sure, but it could have been under a year, and it was absolutely no more than 7 years maximum. Couldn't have been. Okay. But here's the thing. We know Herod had to be alive. We know Herod died in close proximity to the birth of Jesus, within a couple of years, right? And there is an historical citation by the Jewish historian Josephus that Herod died in very close proximity to a lunar eclipse. And that when you put the puzzle pieces together and determine when this lunar eclipse was, well, see, then that really starts to put this picture together of when did Herod die, therefore when did the Magi arrive, et cetera, et cetera. The problem here is that there has been massive debate about this lunar eclipse for quite some time. Prior to the late 19th century, here you go, prior to the late 19th century, the vast majority of major biblical historians believed that Herod died earlier than 2 or 3 BC, right? Or pardon me, I said that wrong. Let me rephrase. They believe that Jesus was born in 2 or 3 BC. Here we go. Let me rephrase. Prior to the late 19th century, the majority of biblical scholars believed that Jesus had to have been born in 2 or 3 BC because they believed Herod the Great died in 1 BC. Let me say that again. The majority of biblical scholars believed that Jesus was born in either 2 or 3 BC because they believed that Herod died in 1 BC. But in the late 19th century, the preeminent German theologian Emil Schur postulated that that Herod died in 4 BC. This was accepted pretty much without debate for the next 70 years. And it went in every Bible commentary. It went in every Bible dictionary, every Bible encyclopedia for about 60 to 70 years. Everybody said Herod died in 4 BC, 4 BC, 4 BC, 4 BC, 4 BC, 4 BC. And as a result, that means all of the scholars now shifted their search parameters, because if Herod had to be alive and Herod was alive in 4 BC, then that means Jesus had to have been born earlier. So now everybody starts looking at 5, 6, 7 BC, 10 BC. I've even seen theories on 12 BC. So it pushed everything earlier. Same thing with the astronomy. Okay, if Herod died in 4, and that means the Magi arrived earlier than 4 BC, and they said, we have seen his star in the east, then you're looking for astronomical markers that occurred earlier than 4 BC. So that's where everybody searched for decades. For decades, everybody searched earlier than 4 BC. Problem is that it's highly probable that the 4 BC date is wrong. That like I said, prior to Emil Schur, the abundance of biblical scholars believed Jesus was born in 2 or 3 BC because they believed Herod died in 1 BC. Then Emil Schur comes along, throws everybody a curveball, and then we're searching wrong dates for about 60 to 70 years. Then finally, in the mid to late 20th century, it started getting re-examined. A bunch of scholars based primarily out of Los Angeles, in cooperation with the Griffith Observatory there, and a very significant biblical chronologist started re-looking at this and going, I don't think so. I think that the eclipse that they're talking about occurred in January of 1 BC, and that therefore Herod died in late January or early February of 1 BC, which means the Magi arrived in late 2 BC, which means Jesus was born, now according to Herod's margin of error, because Herod's margin of error was 2 years, right? So if Herod died in early 1 BC, then you can backpedal up to about 2 years, and now you've got the time frame when Jesus had to have been born, right? So there was this very significant debate for a long time because Emil Schur, who was so significant in other areas of biblical history, said, oh no, this eclipse had to have been in 4, when reality it was in 1. And all you need is good astronomy software, and you can look at that on your own and realize that, yeah, there was 1 in 4 BC, but there was 1 in 1 BC, and the 1 in 1 BC makes more sense when you put all of the other pieces of the puzzle together with it. So now moving on, let's talk about the registration, because this one was a red herring for years. In other words, this was another one that skeptics and atheists wanted to poke fun at, because they said, oh yeah, Quirinius, the taxation or the census conducted by Quirinius happened at such and such a time, but there's no record that Quirinius was the governor of Syria at that time, which is what Scripture says, right? The scriptural record tells us very plainly that Quirinius was a governor, key point, was a governor in Syria at the time of this quote unquote registration. Well, the way the argument goes is that, pardon me, sorry guys, got to clear my throat. So the reason this was such an issue is because the Romans were very good at taxation and very good at taking a census, right? So why would Luke mention a taxation or a census, and then when we go looking at the historical records, we quote unquote can't find one? Doesn't that just throw everything off? And then when we do find one, and especially when we do find one that was administered by Quirinius, it happened at a different time. Ooh, see, so that, I get it. That has the appearance of just throwing everything off until we realize that there's lots of historical records about Quirinius, and Quirinius did administrate a registration that was initiated in 3 BC and was completed by the end of 3 BC. But this was a it wasn't a taxation, and it wasn't a census in the true sense of a census. It was a registration. It was a registration and an oath of allegiance designed to coincide with the declaration of the Roman Senate was going to declare Augustus Caesar pater patriae, which means the father of the country, right? So what this required was an oath of allegiance by every notable citizen in the empire, right? But it wasn't done on an individual basis. It was always done on a city basis, is really what it boils down to. That's how the Romans would do it, is that the city records would be held at town hall, right? City hall or town hall would have the records, and then there would be a Roman magistrate of some type who was assigned to oversee a particular area, right? Now, not every single city had a Roman magistrate designated over that specific area, right? Over that specific city, but it would be over an area, right? So the town officials of Bethlehem would have reported to some Roman official at some point, hey, this is who lives in Bethlehem, right? And Bethlehem would have been important because it was the traditional hometown of David, king of Israel, right? Therefore, Bethlehem did have a certain reputation as being like, a royal town, kind of city of. It's the city of David, right? It's the city of David, right? So Joseph and Mary, they migrated. They relocated to Bethlehem because of this registration. It was not go there, register, and go back to Nazareth. That was never their intention. Their intention was to relocate to Bethlehem so that the Messiah could be born in Bethlehem according to prophecy. Okay, that's really, we overlook that, and that it's really painfully obvious that it's right in front of us that they would have been aware of the prophecy that the Messiah had to be born in Bethlehem, and they were like, okay, well, then we got to move to Bethlehem. I mean, there it is, right? Now, moving on, because what I want to do is I want to get to, because everything so far, pardon me, sorry guys, I just got a dry throat here and it's making me cough. So everything up until now has actually been a little bit vague. But we're now getting to the information that actually has teeth that really starts to tell us when he may or may not have been born. And we've got to go back just for a moment and talk about Zechariah, because we are told, here you go again, it's in the record in Luke, where Luke shares with us that Zechariah was offering incense in the temple according to the division of the priests that he was a part of, right? And if you know anything about the division of the priests, this is why this is important. They ministered in the temple at according to a specific rotation, right? They were divided into 24 divisions. Each division ministered in the temple 2 weeks out of the year, but it was 1 week, and then 6 months later, it was another week. Also, all 24 divisions ministered at all the 3 required feasts, right? The 3 required feasts, they would all meet for those, but there was actually a total of 7, but they all 7 fit within the 3 required. So it's kind of saying the same thing. Department of Redundancy department there. But at the 3 required feasts, all of the priests would come to Jerusalem. Now, I believe that that is why Luke says that Zechariah was ministering according to the division of Abijah, is because it was not one of the appointed feasts. It was according to his biannual weekly service. Right now, that biannual weekly service of the course of Abijah would have been that was the 8th course of priests, which means it would have been in the 8th week of the new year, and then 6 months later as well, right? So the 8th week of the new religious year is going to land you in June, right? So the course of Abijah would have either ministered in June or December. Actually, June and December. 1 week in June and then another week in December. So now the part about this that we don't absolutely know, but that we assume, is that when Zechariah went home from serving, that he and Elizabeth got together and conceived pretty darn quickly, that there was no significant gap. That the miracle here is that after his encounter with the angel Gabriel in the holy place in the temple, that he goes home, he and Elizabeth get together, they conceive, and that they conceive pretty darn quickly. John the Baptist would have been born 9 months later, and that Jesus would have been born 6 months after that. So if we can determine when Zacharias ministered in the temple, you add 15 months, you got the birth month of Jesus, right? And according to the best evidence we have, he ministered in the temple either in June or in December, okay? Which is really interesting, because that means that if he ministered, all you got to do is do the math, right? If he ministered in June, then that means Jesus was born in September. Okay. If he ministered I got to make sure I say it. It's so easy to get it flipped in your head, right? If Jesus, there we go. Sorry, guys. If Zechariah ministered in the temple in June, then Jesus was born in September. If Zechariah ministered in the temple in December, then Jesus was born in March. Okay? So that's why, going back to the beginning of my show today, there is a little bit of evidence, the possibility of a spring birth. I don't believe that the other evidence lines up. Okay, but this is where we get that part of it. is that if we are talking about Zechariah ministering in the temple in December, well, then you add 15 months and you get a March birth date for Jesus. Okay, so it's not that it makes no sense whatsoever. It makes a little bit of sense, but I don't think that the other information adds up anywhere near as readily. Now, real quick, let's talk about the shepherds very quickly, because once again, they were just not in open field between October and March. So unless you've got a reason that that's an exception, then you got to kind of push that one aside for a minute, right? But the indicator that really tells us something is the Magi. Okay, come on. It's the Magi. The Magi show up at the court of Herod the Great, and they say, "We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." Okay. And the phrase "in the east" means in the rising, as it rose above the eastern horizon in the morning. This is really interesting, and this is why this record is so helpful. There are 3 or 4 phrases used in the Gospel of Matthew that are actually astronomical. It's actually astronomical terminology. But what's interesting about it is that it's astronomical terminology phrased in such a way that a layman could understand it. It's not the technical jargon of an astronomer. It's astronomical terminology in layman's terms, so that a layman can go, "Oh, okay, all right, I'm tracking with you. I can see how a star or a planet could do that. I get it," right? So phrase number 1 is this phrase "in the rising," not just in the east, in the rising. So that's what they mean, is just like the sun rises over the eastern horizon, so do the stars and the planets. So we have seen his planet, his star, which is a planet in this case. We have seen his star in the rising. See, and the Magi, as professional astronomers, they would have known exactly what to look for and exactly what they were seeing when they saw it. But we also note that once they arrived at the court of Herod the Great, and then Herod told them, "Oh yeah, by the way, he's going to be born in Bethlehem. Go find him there. When you find him, return and tell me." Then we are told that when the Magi turned due south from Jerusalem and headed towards Bethlehem, it says the same star that they saw in the rising went before and then came and stood over directly where the young child was. Now, this is often misinterpreted to mean that it was this glaring star that was actually moving through the night sky and then it just stopped, when in reality what it was the natural orbital mechanics of the planet Jupiter. And the planet Jupiter was known throughout classical antiquity as the king planet. Okay. And for 15 months, the Magi had been tracking the planet Jupiter because it had been doing some very, very interesting things. It was repeatedly in conjunction with the star Regulus, which was known throughout classical antiquity as the king's star, in the constellation of Leo, and Leo was known throughout classical antiquity as the royal constellation. So you've got the king planet and the king star in conjunction in the royal constellation repeatedly for a 15-month period of time, beginning in July of 3 BC and running through October of 2 BC. Now, that's very provocative because this would have been an unprecedented series of astronomical markers involving the king planet, the king star, and the royal constellation. Nothing like this had ever happened before that had been visible to human eyes. That's why this was such an extraordinary thing, and why it, what's the word I hear? It provoked the Magi to travel from the Parthian Empire into Roman territory, okay, administrated by Herod, with an ambassadorial entourage and show up at the court of Herod the Great and say, we have seen his star in the east, we have come to worship him. But what's really provocative about this, the reason this makes so much sense, is because those standard orbital mechanics of the planet Jupiter can be tracked, and that once again, we can use astronomy software and we can say, oh, okay, well, if that's when the rising was, what about these phrases went before and then stood still? Well, it turns out Jupiter engages in unique movement in the night sky that fits that description. When Jupiter rises earlier in the year, it then begins to travel across the sky from right to left, okay, or from east from west to east. Basically, it moves easterly, right? So if you're in the northern hemisphere, that would be from right to left. And then it reaches a point where it actually slows down, stops, and then appears to move backwards. Now, it appears to move backwards because the other stars in the sky are continuing to move, are quote unquote continuing to move. Jupiter doesn't actually stop. It only appears to stop because its orbit is slower than the other lights, and so they appear to pass it, right? So this is what is called retrograde motion. Other planets do it as well. That's why this is significant, is because, okay, which one, and then how does it all fit together in this puzzle? So it appears to stop, stand still, and then go back the other way. And then it does it again. It stops, stands still, and goes back to its normal course. But the point being is that we can measure this. We can look for it using an astronomy program on a computer and say, hey, the night sky would have looked like this on such and such a date. The point being is that this matches up with all of the other chronology. If when we put all of the chronological pieces together, we get the Magi arriving, see, because if Herod died in early 1 BC, then that suggests that the Magi arrived in late 2 BC, in December of 2 BC. Oh, well, guess what happened in December of 2 BC? The stations of Jupiter, okay, when Jupiter would have appeared to have stood still. So that actually fits exactly with their statement that the star they had seen in the east, in the rising, came to where it stood over where the young child was. That would have happened on December 28th of 2 BC, which is interesting because if you give the Magi 2 or 3 days for hanging out at the court of Herod the Great to have both their public and their private meetings with Herod, when Herod told them to go to Bethlehem, believe it or not, that means they very well could have arrived in Jerusalem on December 25th. Very interesting. That does not for 1 second mean that's when Jesus was born, right? But it is very provocative in realizing, oh, so maybe now, 200 years later, when people started discussing when Jesus was born, they may have said, oh yeah, well, remember, there's this rumor about that when the Magi showed up at the court of Herod the Great, it caused this real buzz. I mean, the entire city was on edge because of this ambassadorial entourage that showed up, basically unannounced and scared the heck out of everybody. Well, when did they show up? Well, they showed up in late December. Oh, well, that must have been when he was born. Not realizing, no, that's not when he was born. If you put together the evidence with Herod and the Magi, Herod even says, okay, when did the star appear? Oh, yeah, 2 years ago? Oh, 2 years ago. Okay, well, now go kill every male child under 2 years old in Bethlehem because he was probably born about 2 years earlier. Okay, roughly 2 years earlier, because I absolutely believe that Herod added a margin of error to, quote unquote, make sure he gets him, right? But isn't that very interesting that the Magi potentially arrived at the time that we consider Jesus to have been born, which makes a lot of sense into why this remains a riddle to this day. When was Jesus born? I absolutely believe he was born on September 11th of 3 BC. I believe that the evidence points to it. Everything I've shared with you today points to that conclusion, because now you look at all these chronological indicators, they line up. This one here, 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 this one here. The heliacal rising of Jupiter would have been on July 29th of 3 BC. That was seeing his star in the east. Then Jesus would have been born on September 11th of 3 BC, about 3 months into a 15-month period of unprecedented celestial signs involving Jupiter and Regulus in Leo. When that 15-month period of time ends and that series of signs ends, it's late fall, early winter of 2 BC. The Magi make the determination to travel to Jerusalem. It takes about 35 to 40 days to make that journey, which lands them in Jerusalem in late December of 2 BC. They see the station, the first station of Jupiter, on December 28th of 2 BC. The eclipse mentioned by Josephus occurs on January 9th and 10th of 1 BC. Herod is then dead within 3 to 4 weeks of that occasion. It all lines up. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap up our show for today. I hope you enjoyed that. What a great time of year to investigate the truth about when Jesus really would have been born. I am Tim Kise, and you've been listening to God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. God save the King.